Hello, my name is Mary Kidd and I am Director of the Saltire Society. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you to the second of the Saltire Sessions, a new series of online discussions with the creators and thinkers shaping the cultural landscape of Scotland today. We hope these conversations will offer you food for thought, signpost you to new and thought-provoking books, events, and other cultural activity, and perhaps inspire you in your own creative pursuits. Each is designed to slot into a lunch break or a similar time in your day. Today, it is my very great pleasure to be speaking with Gerda Stevenson. Gerda will, I think, need very little introduction for many folk listening. Among fans of Scotland's drama, music, and writing, she is weel kent and better loved. The Scotsmen have called her our greatest actress, and many people first came across her in this capacity. On stage, her roles have included Hameliness in Satire of the Three Estates and Phaedra in Edwin Morgan's Scots translation of Racine. On the small screen, her credits include iconic series from Shetland to Midsummer Murders, and on film, she has acted in blockbusters, reaching millions upon millions of viewers as Mel Gibson's mother-in-law in Braveheart, and in art house gems such as Margaret Tate's Blue Black Permanent. Gerda also works behind the camera and the curtain as a director, and recently has carved something of a niche in short film and community story. She is a singer and a songwriter and a poet and writer in English and Scots. Her poetry includes the hugely popular collection Quines, telling the stories of Scotland's women, and her short stories have been collected as Letting Go and Cat Wummin, released just last year. Gerda is truly one of Scotland's leading creative women. It is a great privilege to have you here, Gerda. Hello, and how are you today?
Hello, I'm fine and looking forward to this, Mari.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. And
It's
if
an
you
honor.
don't,
It's an honor to be
oh,
involved in anything to do with the Saltire Society, I have to say.
Oh, that is wonderful to hear. And the Saltire Society, of course, is 90 this year, so we're extra excited to be celebrating that. And maybe that brings me on to my first question for you today, Gerda, which is a sort of starting at the beginning. I wanted to ask you a wee bit about your young life and whether you've always experimented with a broad range of creative practice, or whether some of those interests have developed throughout your life.
I think I've always experimented with a broad range. From as early as I can remember, I was thrilled by literature. My father used to read to us, and I remember Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn and Oscar Wilde's stories, The Selfish Giant, and other stories. And he would take us on walks in the wood, and he would sit down at the foot of a tree while we would take our children's toys, sometimes, little doll's house furniture, and make little houses among the tree roots, while he was reading Walt Whitman to us, and way above our heads, and James Hogg, the Ettrick Shepherd. So I was kind of steeped in it, and also in Scots, because my father, as a composer pianist, became very friendly with Hugh McDermott, who lived just down the road. And people like Robert Garriach, I remember, and Sidney Goodsey Smith visited the house. And so, and Dad set their work to music, and I would hear William Souter's words. So there was all of that going on, as well as a very, as they say, the Anglophone sort of side of things, Francis Hodgson Burnett, all kinds of things. But also, I was a member of the local drama group, which I absolutely loved, and decided age 12 that that was it. I was going to be an actor. But also, I I did a lot of drawing and painting and book illustration, and I did think that maybe I would go to art college. And of course, music was a great big thing, and I used to listen to Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez, and they're all part of the same thing, and it's like it's just storytelling in different forms is how I experience art.
And it's a beautiful way to think of it. I was interested then, you said that when you were in the drama group, you sort of decided that's it, I want to be an actor.
Mhm.
Did the idea of a life as a creative practitioner, as a professional life, as a creative practitioner. Was that a path you set on quite early? Oh, I know a lot of kids kind of have the idea and then they change and they think they're, going to be an astronaut or they're going to be a physicist. Was it something that you set on and stuck with?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember, excuse me, I remember a babysitter coming round, and I must have been very young, and asking the three of us, that my brother, my sister, and me. I'm in the middle. So I think my sister would have been just a baby, but she said, "What do you all want to be when you grow up?" And I remember I said, an actress or an artist. I said something like that. I can't remember specifically, but it was definitely to do with the arts. And my mother, she was a piano teacher, and then she became a nurse, but she brought great instinctive awareness to the family. From a very early stage, she thought I would be interested in art, which I was, and she bought this collection, and I used to get them for my birthday, of Arthur Rackham's illustrations of the Border Ballads, or Edmund Dulac. Marvelous illustrations that I would pore over, because they were works of great storytelling, these illustrators, and she had an enormous influence on me as well.
I'm curious to ask, Gerda, as you've said, ultimately everything that you do is sort of a form of storytelling. In terms of your working life, how do you decide how to divide your time between the different things you do? I'm nosy, I suppose, to ask whether it's a case of opportunities coming up that direct you towards a specific form, or is it a case of wanting to tell a particular story and then that story guiding you in terms of the form that you then pick up to tell it?
It's a good question. I would say that it's a combination of both, you know. But a lot of it is just, I mean, for example, my book Quines, my first short story collection. In fact, I think everything I've written has been, I mean, I've not had a commission or even any, sort of royalties in advance or anything like that. Those are, all my books have been things that I've just done in my time, if you like, while I'm also doing certain commissions. I mean, the films I've made were commissioned by the St Magnus International Festival and the Pennycook Community Arts Association. It's now called Community Arts Pennycook. And BBC, I did a short film with Angus, which Angus wrote some years ago, 1990 something or other, and Ebert, The Sacrifice. That was, I think we put in an application and got it, I mean, you could see, if you look at my rejection list of applications and submissions, it's huge, So the last book that I've written, Cat Wummin, which was Cat Wummin, which was launched last year at the Edinburgh International Festival with you, Mari, in sharing it, and it was great. I really enjoyed it. It was such a lovely session. That was the first one that's come out of not exactly a commission, but the Scottish Books Trust has certain ring fence money for publications in Scots, which I think is a good thing. And my publisher, Luath Press, who's published all my work, which I'm very grateful to Gavin at Luath for that. Although my first collection was published by Andy Croft of Wonderful Smokestack Books. I couldn't get published in Scotland, I have to say. I sent my books everywhere, my first book of poetry everywhere, but Andy published it. And then, the Scottish Book Trust has this pot for Scots language, and it goes to the publisher. It doesn't go to the writer. So Luath asked me if I had anything I could come up with. And it was very short notice. It was like within the same morning. And so I put together a proposal and thinking, it won't happen. And then I got it. Or rather, Luath got it. So that was the first one where I was actually asked to come up with something as a piece of writing for a book, in that sense.
I think that's really interesting, and for anybody listening who writes, there's something very interesting in the idea that perhaps writing without a commission is a different kind of freedom, although you're obviously taking on all of the risk of what will happen to that work. And as you say, you end up with all sorts of projects behind you. But I'm guessing that none of those are ever wasted because they will always be feeding into your work as you go forward. And you've mentioned your films for the St Magnus Festival, the gorgeous Storm Watchers, and a very beautiful example of what you've been saying, originally written by George Mackay Brown as a play and also a piece for publication on the page and then made into a gorgeous film for voices, a really beautiful thing. And you've made another film that you mentioned with with Penny Cook around the paper mills, and they're very collaborative projects, or they certainly seem like very collaborative projects. And I wanted to ask, is that something that you enjoy? Is that something that motivates you as a practitioner? Because obviously, story writing and writing for the page can be quite solitary. Do you have a preference for being locked up yourself writing or working with others and collaborating?
I love both. I absolutely love both. I like to be on my own. I enjoy time on my own. I go walks and I do a lot with my dog, and I do a lot of writing in my head while I'm walking. Um, but also, I absolutely love collaborating. There's nothing I love more than, getting into a rehearsal room, either as a director or an actor, and working on a text and creating a show or a film. I mean, it's just live theatre is just a marvelous thing. I was the associate director with Jerry Mulgrew, who's the artistic director of Communicado for 12 years. And, the joy of being in a rehearsal room, producing those shows, was just nothing like it. Love it. So sometimes I do miss, if I'm writing and I'm solitary, I do miss that. Because I'm a very people person. I love working with other people. I love working with other people's ideas and the whole collaborative thing of coming up with ideas. Although I've never co-written a book or poetry or lyrics. Now I know that's something that a lot of songwriters will write lyrics with somebody else. I've never tried that. I can't quite imagine it. I'm writing songs at the moment for a musical, but I'm only writing the tunes. I'm not writing the lyrics, and that's interesting because I've done that before. I've written a whole set of songs based on the poetry of Isabel Wiley Hutchison, who was an Arctic explorer that I'm very interested in, and I've got a project of my own that I want to do based on her. And I need to get down to it. That's the kind of thing, where I just have an urge and I get on with it. Although I have to say, as a wife and mother, well, I suppose I'm a widow now, but for 3 years I have been. But there was a lot of caring involved for my husband, Angus, in his later years, and I have a daughter who has Down syndrome, and a lot of care involved in that, and she's absolutely glorious. She is now living in independent supported living just down the road, which is great. But I have had a history of squishing my work into corners of the day. Not obviously when I'm rehearsing in a rehearsal room, that's different because that's a protracted chunk of a whole day. But with the writing, I've got very good at writing in any circumstance, anywhere in the house, just when I can squeeze it in, because that's kind of been the pattern. And now it is very strange that my daughter, she's living away from home now for the last nearly 2 years. Angus is no longer here. And I have these kind of eons of time, and I'm not being a carer, and it's quite discombobulating.
I can imagine, and hopefully, though, as time goes on, you'll find that you can spread yourself out into all of those spaces and reclaim them a bit
Yes,
for
yes.
yourself. We should say in passing that your daughter is a marvelous artist and has created some of the gorgeous cover artwork for your collections, which
She
is
has.
absolutely beautiful. We'll put some on the screen so that anybody listening can have a look. Um,
Yes.
I'd like to come back to asking you a question. I've got a little germ of a thought, but just thinking about something you've just said, and I'd like to come back to ask you that. But first, I would like to ask you a wee bit about the Scots language. You've touched on this already. You write in Scots, and there was a specific opportunity for Cat Wummin through the Scottish Book Trust Scottish Government Fund. And you won, and we were delighted to see it, the Janet Paisley Award for services to Scots at the Scots Language Awards late last year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask you a two-part question. The first one is how what is there a difference when you're working in Scots? What specifically it means to you and offers to you? And then I've got a wee question I'll come back to about tips for other people. So does Scots does it give you opportunities that you don't have, or again, is it just something very natural that some things want to be told in Scots and some things want to be told in standard English?
Yes. To answer the question simply, it's just a question of which voice comes to me. And in fact, I've written far more in English than I've written in Scots. Although I am writing increasingly, perhaps more in Scots. Um, but they are a very different experience for me. I mean, I'll never forget receiving in the post in the days when you did post things and didn't just email an attachment. Um, Edwin Morgan's Phaedra, and Kenny Ireland, the artistic director at the Lyceum, asking me to play the title role. And I remember reading it, and it's in Scots, a marvelous translation. I mean, just such a gift. And it just kind of went straight to my heart and gut. And I thought, I get this. I can hear it. I know how to say it. I can kind of chew the words in my mouth. And I just loved that. And there's something about the musicality of Scots that is very specific and which does fire me up. And I don't know whether that's to do with experiencing it at home as a child, listening to my father's settings of MacDiarmid and Souter and Helen B. Cruikshank and James Hogg, and just being aware of those sounds. But they also relate so much to the landscape that I live in, because I live in the Scottish borders, and well, on the cusp between the borders and the Pentland Hills, Robert Louis Stevenson's Hills of Home. So I think there's something about Scots that hits me at a gut level. I mean, it's difficult to describe. I remember discussing this with Liz Niven, and she agrees with that. And there is an innate musicality, which Angus always used to say there is in Gaelic, which was for him a great gift he felt as a poet, the musicality of the language. I find I love writing in English, absolutely. I find I have to work harder in English at finding the musicality and the rhythm. These elements are incredibly important to me in poetry. I know they aren't to all poets, and there are different ways of writing poetry, and the sound isn't necessarily the first or equal to the meaning for some poets. But for me, it's essential. The sound, the rhythm, and I would say I go to further drafts when I'm writing in English. I notice that because I keep every draft of everything I write. And because it's sometimes, if it's not working, I like to go back and see, where I was at a certain stage with the work. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's absolutely fascinating, and it's there's such a nice line through thinking about everything you've said about your growing up in a household where there was music and there was story and there was storytelling, and something around the fact that the sound and the shape of the words are so important to you. That I think is absolutely fascinating, and fascinating too to think about how different languages interact, and perhaps sometimes English suffers from being that great global language where it can feel perhaps sometimes less specific, that there is an infinity of options I think sometimes, for me anyway, I know I sometimes prefer to say translate from English into Gaelic than vice versa. It's a different challenge, I think.
I
I
would just like to say that also in English, though, as an actor, I mean, I'm very aware of the exercises that Peter Brook used to do with his actors, which was to take out separate the consonants and the vowels, and look at a speech, and look at its vowel sounds, and then look at what element the consonants played. And it's a fantastic exercise. And he believed that the emotion was often carried with the vowels, and when you actually break up a work of poetry, some of the soliloquies, for example, that's an interesting exercise in itself. So I think English does have a music, but it's not as obvious.
Yes, it's different. It's different, and it's its own. And
Yes.
that's well, I hope maybe a few people listening might have a go at that. That's absolutely fascinating. I did want to ask you about advice for people who want to work in Scots, because part of our aim in these conversations is to encourage other people in their creativity and their cultural confidence. And something that we hear sometimes is that people in Scotland can struggle with a sort of imposter syndrome.
Oh,
And that can be about creative endeavours, but it can also be about working in Scots because they feel maybe that they don't look like or they don't sound exactly like a person who, if you closed your eyes, would be your automatic image of someone working in Scots. They feel perhaps that there are sort of class barriers, or sometimes that women's voices are heard slightly less often. Or that that it's not theirs, that they don't own it in that way. And I wanted to ask you if you've got any advice for people who feel that way and how they might reclaim their voice in Scots.
gosh, I mean, that is a fascinating question and is very, very complex. And you mentioned the class issue as well. I mean, there was a time when Scots was spoken right through the classes. It was, whereas that is no longer the case, I would say. And therefore, there is this sort of sense of, it's got, if you're going to speak in Scots, you've got to be it's going to be working class, which often means urban, which means that it's going to be have certain limitations. But I think you only have to read the poetry of MacDiarmid. I've just recently gone right through The Drunk Man Looks at the Thistle because I was asked to contribute to an anthology which is celebrating and looking at, responding to that great poem, which was published 100 years ago. And I mean, MacDiarmid's approach was just, well, he called it synthetic Scots, just use everything and reclaim it. And that is also what Edwin Morgan did in his Phaedra. It's an incredible cornucopia of vocabulary from, he doesn't give a toss in his choices there in terms of whether they're urban or rural or north or southeast or, whatever. And it's a very bold approach. And I love that. Now, some people will say, well, it's synthetic, it's not real. But, I think it is a question of reclaiming Scots. And I think we've got to be bold and brave about it and not factionalize and say, oh, no, that's no how you'd say it in the Doric or whatever. We've got to be open to one another. And every language has dialects. I mean, Gaelic, Isla Gaelic, Tyree Gaelic, Uist or Lewis Gaelic, but they have worked out a standard Gaelic. Now every language tends to go through its evolution of being standardized. That's a big debate. A lot of people don't want Scots to be standardized. It's complex. It's also complex because there are not an awful lot of places, geographically and demographically, where a lot of Scots is still spoken. It's probably, in a rich way. There are pockets there, but it's difficult to find somewhere where it's spoken freely with, a rich vocabulary in everyday life. I was born and brought up in the Scottish borders, and I did hear Scots spoken in my school, but a very diluted version. I mean, and at high school, I was aware of it. It was there. People would say Gerdan and Yerd, or Tun and Hus, but I didn't actually hear words like Yerd for earth, or, I mean, a great richness. And I've come to them through literature. And at times I feel it is like an imposter syndrome. I mean, if it's just literature, is it, and not being spoken widely, how does it claim its space as a language? Well, I've just stopped worrying about it. I'm just kind of doing it and loving it, because there's a huge freedom for me in the sounds, the richness. And I use dictionaries, as MacDiarmid did, as Angus did when he was writing in Scots and Gaelic. I think there's no harm in widening one's vocabulary, and there's nothing like getting into a dictionary and getting lost in a dictionary or a thesaurus, but it's complicated. And there are times when I have felt, not recently actually, but when I have felt, oh gosh, am I an imposter? But I feel that anyway. I think that's also a very female issue, feeling like an imposter. I mean, it's taken me a long time to accept myself kind of confidently as a writer. I don't know why. And I think I'm getting there, but I get, I've run loads of workshops, masses of them, for decades. And yet I still, before the workshops, I kind of prepare and over prepare and think, have I got anything to say? Am I, and then I get into the workshop, and then of course the students themselves are marvelous, and then it flows,
Maybe it ultimately all boils down to traveling and curiosity, and not knowing what we don't know yet. And that's perhaps the joy of it, and perhaps that's where some of that imposter syndrome that people describe comes from, is just that it's all about being brave enough to put a foot forward and imagine something no one has imagined yet.
Yes, indeed, indeed, which I actually love doing. Although I do think most people's imagination has been imagined, or imaginings have been imagined somewhere else, and that's also a very exciting thing to discover in the past. Oh wow, that had been, that this thought that I've got that I thought was new has been thought, or thunk hundreds of years ago. How thrilling. Gosh, I would love to meet that person,
Absolutely, absolutely. We're not long past Burns night, and often I trip across something in Burns and think, a man in his era has thought this incredible thought that I've not got to yet in my life. It's wonderful.
Yes, absolutely.
Can I ask you, picking up on lots of the things that you've said, about a little bit about Cat Wummin, just to tell us, just to tell the reader in your own words what to expect when they pick up Cat Wummin.
Well, I'm fascinated by folk lore, folk tales, ballads, and I wrote a short story which was in my first collection, Letting Go, which was based on an Inuit tale, and it's in Scots. And I wrote it first as a short story, and then in fact it became a play. I do that sometimes, play with different forms and reimagine something in another form. And I really loved writing that story. And so I thought, I wonder if I could do a book based on folk tales and perhaps songs or ballads. So that's where the idea came from. And because I was asked to write a whole book in Scots, I thought, well, why not? And make it contemporary retellings of these ancient tales. There's a Japanese folk tale, The Old Woman and Her Dumpling. And I've reimagined that in COVID times, and a woman in a care home who lands up in another world, thousands of years before. there's there's songs like Willie Drooned in Yarrow. I've got a story based on that idea of braid and narrow, sleeping alone or sleeping with a partner, and losing a partner. And The Wife of Usher's Well and The Wife of Crowell, which are two very similar songs. The Wife of Crowell is James Hogg. So I've got a story to do with war in Afghanistan based on that. And yeah, it's responding with contemporary retellings, and it definitely reflects. It's quite dark, and there's quite a bit of supernatural in it, which I'm very interested in. Dark in the sense of reflecting the times that we live in with climate change, and we've gone through COVID and wars. But there's quite a lot of humor in it as well, because I love, in a lot of my writing, I like, particularly in my drama and my short stories, I love having collisions between comedy and tragedy. I really enjoy that, with them hitting up against one another. So there's quite a lot of humor in the stories as well.
And perhaps a theme coming through it of when we other people, the mistakes that we can make. And I thought that really stuck with me when I read it, was that idea of sort of how we deal with other people, and very pertinent in the world that we live in, as you say.
Absolutely.
And just marvelous to see Scots used in all of those ways.
And I see no reason why Scots can't be as international as any language, as can Gaelic be. These, and I that's what I love, taking Scots and making it internationally relevant.
Absolutely. You hear. I wanted to ask you a wee bit about the form, the short story form. And you've said that in a sense, your life has been such that you've found corners to write in, rather than being able to have the main space always for yourself and your creative practice. And I think a lot of people will recognize that. And in a way, poetry and short story lend themselves perhaps to that. So one thing I would like to ask you is if you do, with your newfound space, if you have any interest in writing long form, but that's not for a second to suggest that short form is in any way lesser. I think you and I share a love of the short story. So I wanted to ask you first about that. What does the short story mean to you? And is it your form, or might there be a longer piece in you too?
Yeah, well, I think the reason I love poetry and drama and short stories is that they are very condensed forms. And songwriting too is another one, because I write songs. I'm very excited by the distillation process of getting to the essence of something. And now that I do have more time, I have nevertheless, at this stage in my life, no desire to write a novel at all. I mean, you could say that, I mean, a full-length play, I have written a full-length play, which had a rehearsed reading, and I would love to get it on somewhere. But the cast size is possibly too big. There are 8 actors and there's doubling in it. And nowadays, you very rarely see a play that's got more than four actors in it. So that's another problem. But yeah, I just absolutely love that, distillation process. And I think that drama and poetry and the short story form all have that in common. And I love it, absolutely love it.
It's lovely to see it. You contextualize it as well in that tradition. When we were listening, you mentioned The Wife of Usher as well, thinking about that woman, how many hundreds of years ago, and that, as you say, the distillation of her grief at the loss of sons can still send a shiver down one's spine today.
Yes, universal, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And forms that I think we maybe don't celebrate. I think we do celebrate poetry very well in Scotland, but the short story perhaps less so. So
I
maybe
know.
that's something that folk will take away from this conversation, is to dig in and dive into some short fiction. It's a marvelous form, and there's loads of
Yes, I mean
brilliant
you can
work.
sit down for 20 minutes and read a short story, and a whole world opens up to you, and characters and psychology. I mean, within just that short space of time. I love short stories. I love Margaret Atwood's Stone Mattress collection. I think that's just a fantastic book of short stories. Very strange and bold, and um, I like Carol Shields. Uh, I well, I just love so many short story writers. I think it's a marvelous form.
And perhaps one of our one of our most wonderful proponents of that form, George Mackay Brown, is someone whose work
Oh,
you've brought to life through the Storm Watchers and in other
oh,
ways. Is he an influence too?
there's no doubt about it. George's short stories are just masterly. I mean, there isn't a spare bit of flesh on the bone in his writing. It is so disciplined and so tight and so beautiful. And because it was such a great poet, he his short stories have great poetic qualities too. Absolutely marvelous. Yes.
Absolutely, here, here. I wanted to ask you about a different bit of practice that I suppose you came to through necessity instead of choice, which is that your late husband and nurse's collection of his English language work. He's perhaps best known as a Gaelic poet, but has the most amazing body of English language work. Um, he had begun a project with Colin Bramwell to bring that together and edit it into a collection, but Innes died before that work could be completed, and you worked with Colin to bring that to fruition, which must have been a challenging project in all sorts of ways. And I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about the book and what your experience was of doing that piece of work.
Well, it was a great privilege, and it was also a great comfort when Angus had gone, because it felt like being in his company again. I would sit down here on the stove and be reading through all the possible poems. Colin had already done a lot of work on putting together the collection, and there was a question, and we couldn't include everything, and just how to organize it. And so it was a lovely, very, very creative. And I mean, we weren't rewriting, we were just shaping the collection and discussing the themes, and which were wide ranging. And yes, it was actually a marvelous thing to do. It was very consoling, and I felt as though I was having conversations with Angus, and in a way, and also there was the poignancy of not being able to ask him questions which I would have liked to have asked. But of course, that is the nature of loss, and that happens every day. Things I would like to ask him about, and because his thoughts were always absolutely fascinating. So it was, yes, it was a privilege. It was very, very enjoyable, and it kind of got me through those early months without him. It was a terrific thing to do. I'm very grateful for it in a way, and grateful for Colin's collaborative approach. And I also wrote a little foreword to explain the Alistair Gray's wording on the back of the cover, because we had this. Angus was given a most beautiful sketch, which Alistair Gray had done of Angus in 1973, and typical Alistair, marginalia written all the way down the side, and it was a kind of a landscape shape So we thought it would be just perfect for the book to have the portrait of Angus on the front and then the back with all Alistair's description of the time of drawing Angus, which was in Tom Leonard's flat after a night in the Pewter Pot pub in Glasgow, and Alistair's comments on the political atmosphere at the time, political climate, and which is fascinating because it could be now. And then on the back of this picture is a poem by Angus, which Alistair asked him to pen. So I thought we could have that on the inside and the end papers. And I asked the publisher, Shearsman, Tony Fraser, if he would, if we could do that, because Angus gives a little note when he's writing from Dulwich in London, where he was, where he worked as a housing officer in the 70s. And he had various jobs, but the main one was a housing officer for the Housing Association. And so it's almost like a dialogue between two artists, and it's lovely, and we've achieved that. So Angus just would have loved that, I know, but we didn't get to that stage of the book with him. So but maybe somewhere he knows about it. He and Alistair in the ether somewhere.
I hope they're having a great Kaylee, Gerda.
I hope so. I'm sure they are.
And it is a gorgeous book. We'll drop a picture of it into
Lovely.
the video so people can find it. That's Beyond by Innes MacNechla, edited by Gerda and Colin Bramwell. And that brings us on a very moving note to the end of our conversation today. Thank you, Gerda, so much for such generous insights. And I bit my tongue when you were talking earlier about loving collaboration and all the amazing people you've worked with. I was going to ask if any of them ever turn up in your work, but I'll ask you that another day.
Oh,
that another time.
Yes.
So
I do. I use a lot of autobiographical material. I try to disguise people.
They say no one ever recognizes themselves.
I think maybe do.
Well, that has been a lovely conversation, and thank you so much. The discussion's been hosted today by the Saltire Society, a membership organisation founded in 1936 with the express purpose of championing the cultural life of Scotland. In its 9 decades, it has delivered a vast array of programme. Gerda has been involved in many events over the years, and it was involved in shaping some of the major social and cultural trends in post-war Scotland. The context of Scottish culture today is unrecognisable from the situation that gave rise to the founding of the Society, when many early members considered it quite possible that Scotland's unique cultural heritage, many of the things we've discussed in our conversation today, would cease to exist. Nevertheless, we know that significant challenge still exists, and we hope you may be interested in joining the Society to stand with others who believe in Scottish culture. There's a link in the description of this video you can follow to find out more. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Gerda, for your time and your insights. This has been an absolute privilege. And goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.